We have two things here. One is reactivity and the other is trauma. This is a really huge topic. So regard this as a kind of hors d'oeuvre with lots more to chew on later that we won't be able to get to this weekend. But quickly, how is reactivity different from feeling? Or is there a difference?
Could feeling be considered very directly related to the present, what's going on, whereas reactivity is kind of something triggering something that's unrelated to what's actually
unresolved
going on?
and from the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the main difference. So one of the characteristics of reactivity is that 1 minute you're in one state, and the next minute, without your consciously having any idea, you're flipped into something different. You know what I'm talking about? So it's like that kick in the stomach, or sudden flash of anger, or sudden sense of hopelessness, helplessness, paralysis, sudden inability to talk. Those will be some examples of what I'm talking about. A quick change of state is very noticeable. When your amygdala is alarmed, what are the choices for the limbic system now? So your unconscious choices. Fight and flight have a particular goal. Anyone care to guess what that goal is? When would you stop fighting, or when would you stop fleeing?
Safety.
There you go. This is a level of limbic response that is active. And this has it's very interesting. There's a big fat nerve that runs from your brainstem to your gut, called the vagus nerve. And the nerve has 3 channels. The front channel is when you're in your window of tolerance. The middle channel is when you're in fight or flight, and that means you still have agency. Everybody understand the word agency. You're still able to make an impact on your own survival with fight and flight. The third one, freeze, it's the back part of that nerve, the third channel, which is called dorsal. And dorsal freeze happens when a body is overpowered or entrapped to the point of physical helplessness. That could be pain to the point of being overwhelmed at that emotional level. It could be trapped physically. It could be overpowered in any way, physically or emotionally, at the point when it is too much for your nervous system. Your nervous system will do some form of dorsal freeze, and that includes dissociation of any kind. A dissociated state is a state in which we have distanced ourselves from what is happening in order to survive it. And unfortunately, like the cutoff of the nervous system feelings that we talked about before, it wasn't done consciously, and therefore nobody knows where the off switch is. Or even that there is this thing happening. They're just not aware of it. All of a sudden they're just disconnected. How many of you, if you feel comfortable acknowledging, are aware of places where you actually dissociate? Wow, that's a lot of people. How many of you have other kinds of freeze different than dissociation? Like me, that paralysis.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another form of dorsal, where my system just used to shut down. It makes it extremely odd that I am sitting here in front of a group of people around cameras. So you see, progress can be made. Trauma is basically something that has occurred that hasn't actually been resolved in your brain. And the memory of trauma would include elements of it being assessed as a threat to your survival by your amygdala, and then misfiled in your brain, though the memory is put in the wrong place. It's put in a place where it's not in the library of your brain. The library of your brain is the limbic organ, and that's the hippocampus. That's the brain's library. And normal memory migrates to that library. And I am going to do this in big paint strokes because it's a very complex process and I'm simplifying it. So X or Y happens, and within a certain amount of hours, the brain takes short-term memory and it shifts it into the hippocampus, and then it becomes part of your long-term memory. And the hippocampus is linked by communication cables to your cortex. And so whatever's in the library, the cortex knows about. But if your experience didn't get put in the library, guess what? Forget about it. Your cortex, your left hemispheric cortex, is madly trying to understand why you're having these reactions, but it's making up stories to explain them, when in fact it can't get to the memory because it's misfiled. So, events are not traumatic or not traumatic. How you respond to them is whether it is traumatic or not traumatic. And the most interesting, clear example I know of that is a bunch of years ago, some children, I think they were junior high or high school actually, were kidnapped and put into a culvert, a big pipe kind of thing that they use for water draining. And the culvert opening was blocked, and I think with a big rock or something. So all the children, somewhere maybe between 9 and 12 kids, all except one of them went into pretty much a freeze reaction. But this one kid decided to try to get out, and he worked on getting out, and he got them out. And guess what? Post the event, he wasn't traumatized. All the others were. So you see, same event, different response. So his brain filed the fact that he was in a dangerous situation and he did something about it. And not only that, he saved all the other kids. In the library, it goes. No trauma. The other kids, that's a non-integrated memory. And these form islands of nerve cells that hold the memory. And when X happens in subsequent years, it triggers that memory. It goes off and it literally hijacks the rest of your brain. And that means one of these not integrated islands has activated, and you are now living in that island. Whatever the reality of that island is, you're now in it. why we call it hijack is it basically shuts down the prefrontal cortex. The brain does not have an infinite amount, it uses a lot of energy, and when the limbic system activates reactively, almost all the energy of the brain is now being used by your limbic system. So that's how it hijacks it. Okay? Now, there is a gradation, because it isn't like an all or nothing, the limbic system. You can get mildly reactivated, but you can get reactivated to the point of killing and murdering. So, there is a spectrum here. Now, as you become more and more familiar with your specific patterns of reactivity, then you can do more and more to go, oh, it's that, and that very phrase, just to name it when it's happening, means the cortical part of your brain is not completely offline if you can name it and say, I am having a limbic reaction of some kind. And tomorrow we'll talk about some other practices that are helpful to start to calm yourself down. But naming always helps the limbic system calm down. Just one of the reasons why naming feelings and needs that we learn through our NVC work has the effect that it has. That every time you name one, now they haven't done it with needs because neuroscience is not familiar with needs, sadly. But it is familiar with feelings, and they have actually done brain work on feelings, and they actually have shown that the activation energy level of the amygdala drops and drops and drops every time a feeling is accurately named. So we can only guess they would see even bigger and faster drops because we know experientially that that's what happens. This is one of those arenas where our experience runs ahead of what's actually out there in the literature in neuroscience. So, in the brain, the limbic part and the cortical part don't have a good partnership established naturally. We have to do that for ourselves. You have to do that with your own brain, is to get the limbic orphans reintegrated so the cortex knows about them. And then when they come up, they can be addressed and interacted with using NVC skills. And it works like a charm. It's very effective over time with most people. I don't know anything that's a silver bullet for everybody. So that's the good news, and I'll talk a little bit in the rest of the weekend about actual brain repair and what's actually happening with this and why. The good news is our brains are plastic and they can be repaired at any time till the day we go. It takes a certain level of intentionality and persistence, like anything that has a big payoff. It also has an investment component. And so to read about it in books will help your understanding, and it may even help you manage it. But to build the actual new pathways, that requires some hands-on willingness to on a kind of period. And that's partly why I created New Depths long-term, to get people into a community in which they were committed to doing that work over a period of 9 months. So that gives them a leg up on getting their infrastructure that they want laid down